Representative Brady,
Excused?
Representative Breton. Here. Representative Chestek,
Here.
Representative Feiler,
Here.
Representative Kelly,
Excused?
Representative Lean,
Here.
Representative Singh,
Here.
Representative Webb,
Here.
Chairman Washut.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Very good. So today we have a special presentation from the Wyoming Highway Patrol. Colonel, why don't you explain to us, set the stage, if you will, and then introduce your team for us.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, committee members, we were requested by the state of Texas to provide additional manpower to border operations there in Texas. I saw that as an opportunity for a number of things. One, to respond to a request for assistance by another law enforcement agency. That is one thing I think we do fairly well in law enforcement, is when one agency asks for assistance, we provide that. And I certainly feel that if we ever needed assistance here in Wyoming, Texas would absolutely step up to provide that. Additionally, what it did is give our troopers an opportunity to go to another area, another place, another environment, specifically with a set of significant challenges and circumstances, unlike perhaps they've faced here in Wyoming. And one, would give them that experience, and two, they could understand how to better apply some of those tenets that they learned in Texas here in Wyoming. And what we found, and I'll let some of them relate this, is some of the things that we've learned here that are part of our operational drills, especially when it comes to human trafficking, interdiction. They applied that in Texas very successfully. The other thing it allowed us to do is to look at our processes, our protocols, our training, and our equipment, especially again in a challenging environment, somewhat different than here in Wyoming. So all that above, I was able to assemble 12 of our personnel, all part of a new special response team that is in the making, and probably will be another year to a year and a half before they're totally operationally capable, but nonetheless, they had been assembled and equipped to a degree for special response team challenges. Command and control was a captain, a lieutenant, sergeants, and then troopers. And what you see here before you today is Lieutenant Christensen, Sergeant White, Trooper Kelly, and Trooper Smith, most of which are local. Some are here because they're providing additional personnel during the session. And most of the troopers that you see here, additional troopers you see here during the session, are SRT members. They also are trained in executive protection, security, and so on. So beyond that, I'm glad to stand for any questions, but I'm anxious to let them come up and share some of their experiences with you.
So Colonel, what was the cost to the state of Wyoming to provide these personnel?
So our trip was entirely covered by the Wyoming Homeland Security Office, and I believe through grant funds.
Even better. Why don't you introduce your team?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, committee members, I'll ask Lieutenant Christensen, Sergeant White, Trooper Kelly, and Trooper Smith to come on up and occupy these seats and see if they can do a synchronized seating like we practice in the academy. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Good morning and welcome. Glad you're all here. Who wants to go first?
Why don't we start on that end?
All right.
Trooper Smith.
Trooper Smith.
Good morning. I'm Trooper Smith. I was stationed over in Laramie. I've been a member of the Highway Patrol for about 7 years now.
Is your green light on your microphone?
Yes, sir.
All right, bring it a little closer.
Does that
There
make
we
it
go.
make it better?
That's better.
Excellent. So as I was saying, I'm Trooper Ethan Smith. I've been in Laramie for about 7 years now, and I've been a member of the SRT team since about last summer. When I was in Texas, I worked the night shift in Del Rio. So we stayed in Eagle Pass, and then I was one of the guys who every day would drive over to Del Rio, which was about a 60-minute drive. And so, as part of that, every night I would jump in with the Texas troopers and we'd head out to a little town, probably smaller than Matisse. And it was like a focal point of 3 different highways that would come in, and that was our duty station to patrol. Some of the big takeaways that I was able to gather is our troopers here in Wyoming are very well trained. Texas might be a bigger agency, but I would put our standard trooper above theirs any day of the week. Our supervision, our leadership is far better. Our decision making and the encouragement to be able to go out and do our jobs each and every day is almost better here than it is in Texas. Part of that's our location, because we have such a large state and so few troopers, and they have thousands of troopers compared to our 200. But it was very interesting to see that. Some of their equipment and some of the lessons that we can learn from there was a big takeaway for us. They were very, very well equipped, and we can learn some of that. The teamwork that was shown between Texas, Wyoming, Florida, and some of the other agencies that were all there, it was good to see. The problems that Texas is facing are massive. The amount of police work that is there, it's infinite. The number of drugs and illegals and problems coming across the border that they run into every day, it was eye-opening. We see some of that here in Wyoming with the number of illegal and unlicensed drivers that we come into contact with, but for them, it's almost every stop. Even as I was driving between Eagle Pass and Del Rio every evening, I think I saw a total of 4 separate law enforcement pursuits just in the 10 days I was there, just during that drive, because it's just that constant of a problem for them. So for us to be there and provide a second man and security with them in that car, it's a big asset to them to have.
So Trooper Smith, did you patrol solo in your own car, or did you jump in with a Texas trooper? How did that work? You obviously don't know the roads and streets very well, so tell me a little bit about the logistics of it.
So their troopers that we were with, most of them were doing temporary assignments there as well. So they would come in from all around the state, and they would be assigned to the Eagle Pass, Del Rio areas. And then when we came in, we were assigned a specific trooper to ride along with. So we were riding shotgun while they were the ones actually doing the patrolling. So we were there in an assisting role to provide them safety, security, and we were also had law enforcement powers, so we could step in and help when they needed it. But our primary objective was being more bodies, more eyes, more presence when we're dealing with cars full of illegals.
Questions, committee? Trooper Smith? So tell me a little more about the equipment. What equipment did they have that you came home wishing you had?
The biggest one is every one of their patrol cars is bulletproof. Bulletproof windshields, bulletproof side windows, and door panels. And so it changed. It was the very first stop that I was on with them. When we make stops here, our cars are not bulletproof, and so we exit the car as quick as we can because we don't want to be trapped in the front seat if something were to happen. They, on the other hand, because they have bulletproof windshields, when they stop a car, they just sit and wait because they know that if somebody jumps out and begins shooting at them, which they've had, they're equipped and safe in their vehicles there and can handle it differently than we would here. And so that was one of the really big takeaways because it cost a fortune, obviously, to equip every one of their approximately 2,000 cars with bulletproof paneling. And I eventually would hope to see that here because it was a very big safety concern for them.
Okay, thank you very much. We may come back to you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Trooper Kelly. I am stationed here in Cheyenne. This is Division A. I've been here this is my 5th year. I've been on SRT for 2 years. We left Cheyenne for Texas on August 24th. I remember that because it was my birthday. Pretty cool birthday gift going to Texas. When we went down, my initial impressions were watching the dynamic shift from small town Wyoming to a much larger state. There's a lot more going on. It's a lot more busy. Seeing the work that had already been done on the border was really cool. All the Constantine wire, the Connex boxes, the hard work that Texas had put in to secure the border was impressive. Riding with my trooper, so the goal of us going down was to augment them, and that's more significant than it may sound. Going into like the life of a trooper, we're asked to cover a large area of responsibility, sometimes by ourselves. And to do that with an extra body is it opens the door to a lot more strategies or opportunities that you can't do with just one guy. So for instance, the third day that I was there, myself and another trooper assisted our Texas troopers with a large-scale warrant service in Uvalde. That was impressive to behold. There was hundreds of people from various agencies, from DEA to Border Patrol to their CID, which is our DCI. It was a very early morning on the morning of that warrant service. Myself and Trooper Roberts, who couldn't be here with us today, left Eagle Pass to go to Del Rio at 2 in the morning. The two addresses we were serving warrants on that morning were next to schools, so they wanted to do them in the very early morning where there was no possibility of people being awake or in the area, just for safety concerns. And just having two people in the car on one of the second address that we went to was pretty significant. We were on property on the one side of the house holding security, where the Texas trooper was on one side of the vehicle and I was on the other. That gave eyes to two of the four sides of the structure that couldn't have been done with just one guy. When we successfully, without incident, captured the person of interest at that warrant or at that location, we served as security for the transport vehicle back to the location where they were going to be processed and booked. Doing that with two people gave everyone a bit of confidence that should something happen, that there was extra eyes, extra bodies, extra minds, all that could problem solve to handle any problem that was going to present itself. I learned down there that you want to make as many friends as you can, particularly with Border Patrol, because they're very in tune with what's going on. When we did that, it got fun because they knew what was going on, they knew who was doing what in terms of the resources that they have available to them. Most of that is ranch line. To me, it looked like a cul-de-sac. You'd have one entrance to a ranch, and then you go 100 yards, and there'd be another entrance to a ranch, and it was just ranch after ranch after ranch. On these ranches are what's called drawbridge cameras, which is they would do a still shot like a game cam. This would then transmit to local Texas DPS, their computers in their cars. It would send an alarm on their map where they would click on it, and it would show a still shot of who tripped that camera. And there's millions of these cameras, so then the next one would trip, and then the next one would trip, and then you would see direction of travel, who they are, where they're going, and then collectively they can make a plan to capture those individuals. And this was all in collaboration and cooperation with local ranchers who, rightfully so, were very upset of all the trespassing that's been happening on their lands, people cutting wires. And so specifically, the first few days that I was there, I was assigned to Highway 51, which goes from the border up to Houston. So it's a thoroughfare, largely used or more popularly used for trafficking, because these undocumented aliens want to go to larger cities where then they can carry out their travel plans from there. So as they would pass through, what they would prefer to do is go around the border checkpoint, which is just outside of Eagle Pass. And they would do that by marking fences with ribbon or with a ladder that goes over the top of the fence. And then people who are hired through various means, from like ads on Facebook or Snapchat, and these are everyday citizens who are contacted for, hey, I have a job, it pays this much, you come pick these people up and we send you money. They're not usually, or not always, bad people, they're just people who want to make an extra buck. And sometimes it's significant depending, because sometimes they pay by person, and sometimes you go and you pick up a lot of people, so you can make a lot of bang for your buck. Anyway, I digress. They'll pick up on the American side of the checkpoint, where they're kind of out of the vision of the local traffic and border patrol. And then when there's no traffic, they'll cross through the fence either by cutting a hole in their rancher's fence, using ladder to go over the top, get into a vehicle where most of the seats have been laid down, which was kind of a big sign we'd be looking for. They're usually covered in dust and dirt from everyone getting in and out of it. And so we would be watching for vehicles that would normally have 2 to 3 rows, that you only saw 1 row. It was the front seats, because the back seats were laid down where people could lay down and be out of sight through the windows. I was kind of late to the party on a few of these things where other troopers in the area had found a vehicle. These people don't want to go to jail, so they usually run. And when they do run, they'll go as far as they can, and if they don't think they're going to get away, they'll hang a hard right or hard left, go through the fence as far as they can go until their car can't drive, and then they bail into that very thick brush. I don't know if you all are familiar with the land down there. You can go 10 feet and lose sight of everything around you. And then from there, they call in aerial assets, dogs. Trooper Smith didn't exaggerate by the resources available. There's extensive resources available, from drones, other aerial assets with planes, helicopters, tracking dogs with both Texas DPS as well as Border Patrol. 10 days was fun. I think with a month or more, or like if we get another crack at this, there will never be a shortage of work down near the border in Texas. I could talk about it all day long, but I'll stop here.
Question? So in your contact with folks who were fleeing after they came across, were they families, adult males, children? What did you encounter?
Primarily military-age male adults. The ones that I found, it was primarily males, and they were usually between the ages of 20 and 40.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sergeant.
Good morning. I'm Sergeant White with the State Patrol stationed out of Evanston, and been on the agency for going on 27 years. And I guess it's important to kind of set the stage for what Texas did down there. At the time that we were there in Eagle Pass, we kind of missed the really busy time by a month or so because of efforts of what Texas did by taking charge down there to secure their portion of the border. But my general duties was similar to Trooper Smith's. We'd ride with a Texas trooper. We'd be assigned to them, ride in the passenger seat. And my area of responsibility was in Zavala County, Texas. I don't remember what the highway was, but it was a highway that ran out of the border and then on up into San Antonio. And so in the little town of La Pryor is where we would sit and do various interdiction efforts. And I was surprised the little small sheriff's office that was there, they had handheld x-ray machines for interdiction work, which we utilized a couple times. The only real drugs or anything we got was just individuals with drugs that were various gang members that we were tipped off to by the Texas CID, whose job it was to basically work undercover. They would observe, they'd either know who they might be looking for, or they would observe something and then ask us to look for probable cause to stop the vehicle. The thing that stood out to me the most was in the area called Shelby Park, which was at one point a nice park in the Eagle Pass area that was now all Connex boxes and concertina wire, including concertina wire out in the river. And the trooper that I first rode with kind of walked me through the park and then up on top of some of the Connex boxes and kind of described what was going on only a month before, including the area we walked was, he said, literally knee deep in clothing for the number of illegals that were coming across, and passports. And actually some rather horrifying stories that they talked about that they witnessed that we're unable to do anything about. But one of the things that they did down there, the reason what they did was effective was because you know, they're a state agency, got no authority over immigration stuff, but they did get most of the local landowners and ranchers basically to sign affidavits that they would be willing to press charges for trespassing. And in talking to some of the local landowners, I was surprised the number of people that were actually glad that we were there. I figured feel that we were kind of invading their state, but we were very thankful for the help that we gave. But a couple of them had basically abandoned their homes because of the amount of vandalism and trespass that occurred on their ranches. And a lot of times people were looking for food and water, so they would put out cases of water just to try to alleviate any problems. But they had barns and homes that were actually broken into just because of the number of people that were coming through, I guess, just, with criminal intent. I was surprised by the number of pursuits that occurred. It seemed like there was at one point 3 or 4 a day, and we just got in on a tail end of a couple of them. And some of the other duties, Trooper Kelly had mentioned about raiding some of the stash houses. There's definitely plenty of work to be done down there.
So can you tell us a little bit about the trooper that you worked with? Level of training, experience, and any other impressions that you came away with from about the personnel that you were interacting with?
So the first trooper I rode with, he'd actually been on their agency for a little over 30 years, so he'd been on for quite some time. He'd been down there. This particular operation was Operation Lone Star, so they had various troopers that were coming down just to work that. And he's primarily the one that I learned the most from, had a ton of experience. The second guy that I rode with was honestly a little less than motivated. I'd actually requested to go with another trooper, so I actually rode with one of the local troops who only been on about 6 months, but he was much more motivated. So we were around with him and just made stops and did general trooper work. But they all are equipped. They all standard, all have riot shields and crowd control equipment with them, and said the ballistic glass in their cars. One thing that I will echo that I came away with a ton of pride in my agency. It's always nice to be able to get more equipment, but the amount of stuff that we deal with and with the number of personnel that we have is pretty impressive when you consider Texas DPS, an agency of probably over 2,000. And they were kind of shocked at the areas that we patrol and the number of things that we deal with.
Very good. Thank you, Sergeant. Question? Representative Lean?
Thank you all for coming today. My question is, did you ever see illegals leaving the US? I mean, you saw plenty coming in, but did you see any going back?
I had never witnessed that. I don't think that was anything that was monitored from what we were doing.
Representative Filer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just got a question is, just probably more out of curiosity than anything. We send, our highway patrolmen to another state. How do they just deputize you, or how do they do that in order for you to be able to do your job, because you really have no jurisdiction in Texas? How did that work?
Sergeant?
Yeah, I don't know what was, in the scene in the background, but I do know that we all had signed paperwork, and we were essentially, for legal purposes, Texas troopers. We were given arrest powers. We could do anything we needed to do. If we needed to ask somebody out of a car, if we needed to put cuffs on anybody, and that was all done, I'm sure, through their state attorney general or whatever their equivalent of that is.
Any likelihood that you'll have to go back for court testimony or anything, or is the Texas trooper going to be the primary witness on the cases that you were involved with?
Any of the cases I was involved with was not anything that I would have to go back to court for. There was something in place where if the trooper made an arrest and we were any part of that, we were supposed to do a report. It just happened that any of the arrests that the trooper made that I was with, they actually just turned over to their CID agents, and so no further action on my part was required.
Representative Bratton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I arranged 2 trips to the border for legislators. One was in 2010, one was in 2014. I attended the one in Phoenix. We also, there was one in Brownsville. And I want to know, on our trip, we saw a lot of evidence of other nationalities. Just a lot of literature and many, just evidence, which we can talk to offline about, a lot of other different people, not just, from Central America coming across the border. And I wonder if you saw any evidence of that when you were down there and how you interfaced with the Border Patrol. That's where we spent all of our time with the Border Patrol when we went down.
From my standpoint, we spent very little time with Border Patrol itself. This was to augment Texas. The troopers I rode with did have testify to the fact that they had seen many other nationalities other than just the South and Central American countries. It's a smaller percentage, but at the same time, the number of people that were coming across the border, it's still a large number. So we mentioned earlier asking about families that were coming across. There's some of that, but one of the things that hit me was that one day we did have to go and investigate she was a 13-year-old Guatemalan girl who was on her own and had received a lot of cuts and lacerations from concertina wire trying to get through. And so we went and interviewed her, and she came across with a group, and then they abandoned her. So ultimately, we had to take her to a camp that's called Camp Firefly, which was a temporary setup that I believe the federal government had set up where she'd ultimately be processed and then released into the country.
Okay. Further? Thank you. Lieutenant?
Chairman, committee members, thank you for having us. I'll share a little bit of my personal experience as well as some of my duties were a little bit more detached, a little bit higher view. So I have a few things here I want to touch on. So my name is Clint Christensen. I'm currently a lieutenant with Highway Patrol. I've been with Patrol about 7 years. I'm based out of Casper. This is my 11th year in law enforcement. My initial trooper that I was assigned with, I was primarily tasked to CID. So Criminal Investigative Division, very similar to our version of DCI here. My first week was primarily spent functioning with CID, where our primary focus was we were apprehending people who had existing warrants for the purposes of being deported. One of the things that first stood out to me as they have shared is their access to equipment. So some of the equipment that we used heavily was drones. Their drone program is incredibly expansive. I don't remember the exact number of hours, but they were logging thousands of hours of flight time per month. When we would go to execute some of these search warrants at some of these residences, you kind of have to understand that these aren't your standard single-family homes in a lot of these places. You have a plot of land that has maybe 5 or 6 trailer houses and some other structures on them, and it could be anywhere on that property. So in the essence of serving that search warrant, there's a lot of threat things that you have to deal with because you have no idea how many people actually live there, where people could be staying, because some of these homes, I would argue, are probably not fit for occupation or being lived in. So everything is a potential threat. So when they could go in ahead of us with 2 or 3 drones and we could view the live feed, they used a program called TAC, and it was available on iPhone, Android, as well as a web application. And this allowed us to interface with them very well because we could get signed onto it and they could see where we were, but we could also see where all of their assets were. What this also allowed is when they would put a drone up, is we could click on the drone and watch live feed from the drone. So we would go in to do these search warrants, and it was the same thing for the helicopter. If the helicopter or the airplane was in the air, you could click on it and watch live feed on your cell phone. So as we were driving up to the target location, they'd have drones or the helicopter in the air, and you could get live feed of what's occurring before you get there. That was incredibly valuable, especially not being overly familiar with the terrain, but being able to see a full 360 a minute before you arrive and knowing the actual conditions of that target prior to your arrival was absolutely critical. So interfacing with them through TAC and drones was phenomenal, and I actually think we brought back that TAC could be something that could be heavily utilized here in the state of Wyoming. We have, especially with patrol, we frequently interface with our local partners, your local PDs, your counties, fire departments, volunteer departments, and this kind of stuff. But none of us in general use the same computer systems. We all have different radio channels, and while we can swap between them, interfacing is it's kind of like playing a game of telephone, right? being able to have this software and being able to use it statewide would allow us to be able to see where their assets are at. Maybe you hear a emergency call for a PD officer that's injured or fighting somebody. Well, now we don't have to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out and get on the radio and try to figure out where all the stuff's at. We can pull it up and be like, here's where they're at, right? And so that was a phenomenal piece of technology that we heavily relied on while we were there, and I think it could be heavily utilized here, even during like fire efforts, right? You could see where they had the National Guard on there, they had everybody on there, so we could have that deployed to the fire departments as well, and you could see where fire assets are. I think it's just a tool that could be heavily utilized across the state. That was a huge takeaway for me. Some other stories of success. There was another trooper, Keeley, who's not here with us. He was working with his trooper one night, and they observed, partly through, he brought some attention to it, but unusual behavior from a commercial vehicle, something we have a lot of experience and knowledge with. Some odd behavior around a truck stop. Well, they eventually went and contacted it and located it was like a frac trailer, like a pneumatic trailer, and it had, I don't quote me on the exact number, but about 20 people hidden inside. And so they were able to apprehend 20 or so, mostly males, that were inside this tanker trailer that had just come over the border. And that wasn't like a one-off story. That was a pretty frequent. I think while we were there, they caught somebody had rented a white Penske truck and then paid and put logos on it that said Lowe's, and he wore a shirt that looked like Lowe's, looked like a delivery company, and found him transporting illegals and all this other stuff. So it was a pretty frequent daily occurrence. Something else that they touched on was the interagency cooperation. So between Border Patrol and Texas DPS, National Guard, whenever an incident or something would occur, you would have air assets from Border Patrol, you'd have air assets from Texas DPS. You might have National Guard show up with, they had these pickups with these big mounted thermal cameras, and all this stuff would go up on a pole. Everything would show up and help you track down all these different people. And part of that is because, as they were talking about, having a second person in the car was really beneficial. When we typically think about pulling over a car, we think 1, 2, maybe 3 people in that car, but the way that they are transported down there is you would frequently stop a car and have 6, 8, 10 people come out of that car. So if you're by yourself, that's a pretty overwhelming amount of odds to deal with if the circumstances were to turn, adversarial. So having even just a second person there to provide a second set of eyes was absolutely critical. Some additional experiences that some members got to experience, we were able to put a few of our, at least one, I don't remember how many exactly, of our guys up in the helicopter and the air assets of Texas DPS, and they were able to see how those interfaced and functioned. It was really interesting to hear their perspectives of how having an aerial asset can really change your view on a situation, because you can really put the pieces together and understand directions of travel and all this kind of stuff. As Trooper Kelly alluded to, the brush in Texas is unbelievably thick. It's also incredibly sharp. We were recommended to wear glasses because the thorns will, tear out your eyes and things. So when you're pursuing or running through this incredibly dusty, thick brush, it's very easy to lose track of who you're trying to get a hold of, or have them get behind you and potentially put you in a negative situation. Having all those assets and additional personnel was absolutely critical. Let's see here. I also wanted to touch on the bulletproof windshields to kind of give some perspective of that. When we currently stop a car, our priority is to immediately get out of the car, and basically what we call as a mitigation zone is basically move to a position of that vehicle where it puts some hard parts between you and that potential threat. Something I previously have taught in our academy is I've taught active shooter instruction as well as counter ambush for law enforcement. And we know that through studying data that most commonly the attack's going to happen at 1 or 2 points. One, upon initial contact with that vehicle. The second time is upon reapproach, say if that person has a warrant or something like that. We also know through data that we have a bunch of bright lights. They're going to shoot where they expect you to be, right? So you can look in, there's numerous data to show the amount of rounds that are typically focused towards the driver's seat of a patrol car. So for us, we have to leave a small amount of safety to become fully vulnerable before we can get to any point of safety in these circumstances of an ambush. What really changed that paradigm with Texas was that bulletproof glass they had was pretty interesting, because it would be bulletproof from the outside, but you could shoot through it from the inside. So it truly made them incredibly safe and no reason to leave their stronghold, right? So they could contact a car, and if something doesn't feel right or something unusual is happening, where we would usually have to immediately egress our vehicle and try to get to a place where we feel mostly safe, they could just sit right there and they could still have access to the radio, all their tools and equipment, and actually have time, which during a critical incident, time is something is in short supply, but this really allowed them to extend that time to be able to make good decisions. So that was a pretty phenomenal aspect to see, and how it really changed the way they interacted, as well as even during warrant service. You know, we typically don't want to put our car right up in front of the house because there's nothing to protect us. We're trying to use other assets unless you have like armor or something of that nature. Well, for them, they could put their car right up on the front porch because it is armor, it is protection. So really fundamentally changed the way they approached a lot of situations. We touched on community support. I don't think there was almost anywhere that we went for lunch where local members of the community of all races, ethnicities were excited to see us here. Incredible amount of support, and they thought it was really cool to see Wyoming down there. Numerous lunches were paid for because people were just happy to see the support, seeing that it wasn't just Texas fighting that fight. Representative Filer, I believe you asked about jurisdictional issues. From my understanding, I believe Homeland Security had a big part in that part, in getting that stuff organized. So that might be somewhere where you could have further clarification on that aspect. And then touching on court, we all had our body cameras. So anytime that we interacted during an event, right, we were recording on our body cameras, we could write a short report. And in most circumstances, absent some really high profile incidences, there was no expectation for us to return for court. It was an incredible opportunity, and I'm thankful that we got to have it. Really hoping that we get the opportunity to go back. We learned a lot of, as if you've ever gone somewhere and not really known what to expect, we packed a lot of things that we didn't need and forgot things that we really wished we would have had. So if the opportunity arises that we get to go back, we have a far better idea of what we should take with us and what would be beneficial, and the things that we don't need to take with us anymore. There were some additional assignments that we didn't get to experience just because we weren't appropriately equipped at that time. They have what they call a TMU, the Tactical Marine Unit, which patrols the river there. Very heavily armored, frequently interacts with cartel and all this kind of stuff, right? This is a very interesting experience that we didn't get to experience. A lot of value there. And then they also have these things called brush teams which operate in total white light discipline, meaning it's entirely under night vision, and using those cameras that Trooper Kelly alluded to. The other thing on TAC, let me touch on this. So what they would see is they would see on this drawbridge camera, there's a group of people. Well, you get the alert, they could go on TAC, and somebody could draw like a circle and put, hey, we're gonna meet here, this group's heading, they could draw like an arrow with a direction, they're moving this direction, we're gonna meet here, and then we're gonna contact them at this point, right? And it would all be visible on the map so that you could communicate to a large group without a whole bunch of phone calls or a bunch of radio traffic. It was a really phenomenal thing. So they have these brush teams which function completely under night vision, and they're able to go in and contact these groups and really have the upper hand. So instead of having 30 or 40 people flee and everybody trying to find them, you can essentially get all your assets in place to capture the whole group at a single time and really have the upper hand. So it was a really unique experience. Very much appreciate the opportunity to go, and I hope that we have the opportunity to go back.
Representative Webb.
Thank you Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate what you guys have done to help secure our country, but I also want to not minimize what you guys do to help our state, and I appreciate the things that you have done. My question is with the situation in Texas and all of our border states, with the change in administration, have you had any contact with any of your counterparts from down there? Has there been any relief because of the change of administration, and/or do they anticipate any relief in that area?
Lieutenant?
Thank you, Representative. I have spoke with some of the troopers that I developed contacts with down there. And from what I know right now is that there hasn't been much functional change, but I know that morale is high. And I know that there's been some changes within Border Patrol operations, but I don't know the extent to which they're referencing.
Please.
I think it's important to note the changes that have happened here in the state as well. Speaking from a personal experience, about 2 weeks ago, I had a traffic stop of a vehicle coming from Laramie to Cheyenne. After contacting that vehicle for speed infraction, identified two people who are Mexican nationals here with Mexican ID only. Standard practice before November was to request a immigration query, and that would give us information as to their status, if there is any warrants through the immigration system for these individuals. And I bet my paycheck every time that the information that would then be disseminated to me is this person is not legally in the United States, is under removal proceedings, and then a court date is set for blank. And then to collect information, disseminate that information, and then be done with the stop. On this instance, after I asked for an immigration query and got that information back, that one individual had previously been removed from the United States with no record of legal re-entry, and then the other one is legally in the United States. Neither of them had a driver's license. As they were facilitating a licensed driver to come to the scene, ICE quickly responded to the scene and took both into custody. That's the first I'd seen this in my 5 years, and I've heard other troopers say that it had been 10 years or more since they'd previously seen this. And it was a new perspective for me. It's something, as I said before, I had not yet seen, and it seemed as though we were moving in a direction where before I felt powerless, that there was no enforcement action that could be taken for something that in most eyes was deemed illegal. It was just, okay, have a nice day. And now the powers who have the capabilities to do so, the agencies who can enforce such things, are now able to, and we're working closely with those agencies that we didn't before. So even just the growing relationships is very important to me, but also seeing more integration with them as well has been pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about your families. And when you all pack up and go down there, you're kind of pumped, right? It's kind of exciting and TDY assignment and everything, but your family here, not knowing what you're getting into, hats off to your families for, supporting you while you're gone and taking care of the home front. So any comments from the family? Were they just a little happy to see you get home? Representative Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just want to know what takeaways from there that you bring here that you think, okay, we obviously don't want this coming to Wyoming. So what are your thoughts as far as short-term and maybe even a little bit longer term we could be doing here to make sure that situation does not become the situation here in Wyoming?
Sergeant?
Well, unfortunately, the further it gets from the border, the harder it is to contain. One of the things that I noted earlier that was passed on to me when I was down there, the number of clothing and passports that were left on the bank. And the reason for the passports for the other countries that some of these folks had to come through, that was required when they got here. They didn't need it. In fact, it was beneficial for them to throw it away so that there was no identification. What is going to help us is if current administration, I guess, uses its authority to enforce our border laws. But other than that, just general interdiction and then being able to call upon our federal counterparts to help us out.
Representative Fowler.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Maybe not as asking you all as a trooper, but maybe as just your personal opinion. Just south of here, we have municipalities in another state that, allow for illegal folks to come in and they kind of give them a little bit of sanctuary and things like that. Being so close to Wyoming, do we see this as a potential problem and threat at our border?
Trooper?
So with working in Laramie, I can say that the number of illegal immigrants that I come into contact with coming north on 287 is astronomical. I feel like it's increased over the last 3-4 years significantly under the previous administration. And so I do see it as a significant problem that we come into contact with every day.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant Christensen, how many of your interactions would you have associated with organized crime while you were down there? Is it more miscellaneous? Are there opposing logistical networks that you folks are encountering while you're down there?
Lieutenant?
Thank you, Representative. I would say especially with my tasking at that point in time with CID, most of that was pretty targeted interactions. I would say that the vast majority of what we came in contact with was organized, and not necessarily in the sense of the people. Most of the people that we were interacting with were just, foreign citizens who were trying to get into the U.S., but most of them had paid a criminal organization to get them across the border. We've all heard the term coyotes and stuff, but finding out that, these people will pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 US to this coyote to try to get them across the border, and that coyote will take 10, 15, 20 of them at a time. So it's a significant financial investment on the part of the people trying to come across the border, but it's also a huge business to those criminal organizations that are very heavily tied to like cartel operations in getting these people across the border, because it's a significant fund. There's no, you think of if you are completely powerless with no legal protections or anything, and you go and give this person $5,000 cash and you're hoping that they're going to come through on their word. And if they don't, what do? So you see these individuals who are not only victimized by these criminal organizations, but they're also put through the absolute ringer in trying to get here. Sergeant White referenced that 13-year-old Guatemalan girl. Somebody paid for her to get across the border. Well, they did just enough to get the money and then wash their hands, right? So you see these people being victimized from just about every single direction as they're coming through this process. And then there was the second part of your question, if you could please restate it.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That escapes me, but I did have a follow-up question for you.
Certainly.
So what is the interaction between the trafficking, the human trafficking portion, and the drug trade? Are those two associated?
Lieutenant?
Thank you, Representative. Very, very certainly. I'm not going to say that every single person is obviously involved in it, but not that I witnessed, but in talking with other Texas troopers, it's not unusual that maybe I only have $2,000 to give you to get across the border. So the other part of it is, hey, you're gonna be a mule for me, and you're gonna bring some of this stuff either through your body or in some other fashion. You're gonna get this across the border for me. You're gonna reach my contact over here, something like that. So I would say they're very closely intertwined. Some of the individuals that we served these arrest warrants on for deportation, I guess it's doctrine of inevitable discovery. When we served that warrant for that person, we found drugs and narcotics in those structures, and that was a pretty common theme. I wouldn't say it's every time, but I would say you're probably 75% or more of the time would be a likely realistic outcome.
Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several of you, I think it was Trooper Kelly and Lieutenant Christian, also mentioned that there were contact with American citizens who were helping the coyotes and the other people who were helping out this process. Were there enforcement actions taken against the American citizens who were part of this process?
Lieutenant? Thank you, Representative. Yes, I don't remember the exact criminal code or what it was stated, but part of the reason that those people would also run is they maybe didn't know exactly what it was illegal, but if somebody says, hey, drive down here, pick these 6 people up, and I'm going to pay you $5,000 drive in San Antonio, you pretty much know that there's something going on that shouldn't be going on. So I know that there was criminal investigative process that happened on those drivers. I don't know if they were all taken into custody. I think some of it hadn't applied to prior criminal history and things, but there was certainly a criminal investigative aspect of the individuals partaking on the American side of the border as well.
So did any of the Texas troopers volunteer to come up and work I-80 in the wintertime?
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting conversation about our winters up here for them. It was around 120 degrees while we were in Eagle Pass, so the idea of snow to them was a bit foreign. And Chairman, if I may, I would like to address Representative Bratton's question earlier. I made a few notes here in regards to what we can do here locally, if I may. So something that I think could be done more on a state level is I think we could have more local interagency programs and cooperation. We get along and work very well together, but fundamentally, there's not a lot of, outside of some DCI intel bulletins, information sharing can be kind of lacking across the state because there's a bunch of different methods in which we use it. Sharing of information as well as having some kind of established ICS or NIM system to help during events and help establish chains of command, as well as, and we've thankfully, or I appreciate this from the Colonel, we've recently started partaking in task force cooperations with like federal agents or federal agencies, but I also think that's something that could be set up on a local level, would be setting up and assigning task forces to different parts of the state with local agencies as well. We as the state may be able to provide you manpower, but I won't have the knowledge of your local area or local people like you do, and I think that there's a lot of value that could come from enhancing that type of cooperation in various sectors across the state.
Representative Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a bill up in the Committee of the Whole that I hope will facilitate that this afternoon, so thank you.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you were in locations where they were finding drugs, can you speak to the nature? Were they fentanyl? Were they methamphetamines? Are you able to speak to that?
Drugs, Lieutenant?
Thank you, Representative. And yeah, it was a little bit of everything. I wouldn't say any specific one drug was probably more prevalent because there seemed to be a lot of user choice. I mean, everything from low-level marijuana use to significant volumes of methamphetamine and significant counts of fentanyl pills were all discovered while we were there. I would be hesitant to give any specific weights because we were trying to be a little bit separated from that for legal purposes, but variety of drugs across the entire spectrum were pretty consistent, yes.
Representative Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other question for me, and that is the number of unaccompanied children and the amount of suspected human trafficking that you might have seen.
Anyone? One more time, Lieutenant.
Just trying, in an attempt to try to understand the question, I mean, there's a lot of people that we would contact that while we were very suspicious of things, there was maybe enough there or enough reasonable doubt that it didn't proceed into a full like custody. But a lot of that information got referred to, and this is where I go back to that information sharing with local agencies, right? You would put an FI card, a field interview card on these individuals and say, hey, we contacted them here. This is who they were with. This is what they said they were doing, blah, 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 blah. And this would get passed on to not only the other troopers and DPS agents in the area, but also the local agencies and the agencies where that person, was residing or something of that nature. So I think a lot of the contacts that we had, which we weren't able to 100% identify as human trafficking, certainly had elements that allowed us to push it through to an investigative division to actually look further into it. It's very hard for me to quantify what that total number of interactions look like, right, without any kind of confirmation of the end result. But it was certainly the tone of most contacts. Here in Wyoming, I would say, the expected tone when we contact someone on a traffic stop is pretty cordial and pretty friendly. Not that it was unfriendly, but it was certainly more often than not, there's probably something criminal happening here instead of it being innocuous.
Representative Plyler.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to let you all know, we appreciate y'all. And I do spend a lot of time in Eagle Pass, Texas. I do hunt down there quite a bit. actually from helicopters. It's pretty fun. But, you know, we're right in the ranch I hunt on is right along the Rio Grande. But, you know, so I understand the territory you were in, you know, the bushes and those trees and they're thorny. And I mean, it's pretty rough country. But again, I think everybody wants to thank you all from the whole state, not just this diocese or anything like that, but everybody really appreciates you guys. And when I was on the YDOT Commission years back, my favorite report was always from the Highway Patrol, always. You guys gave me the best information for me to educate my children, everything. You guys are one of the top-notch agencies in this country, in my opinion. But I do, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask the director and the colonel some questions, or, you know, after these folks are all done.
Well, let's wrap up with these folks and we'll ask the director and the colonel come up for some closing. Anything further for these fine men? Any closing comments from any of you? Please.
I just wanted to address your question, Representative Webb. In the 7 years that I've been here, I have not been able to save any kids being trafficked, anything like that. It's one of my goals in this career. That's why I got into this. We did have a trooper down there, Trooper Bryant, and we only spent 10 days. And he was able to, on one of their traffic stops, identify a minor who was in a vehicle. Both were illegals. And then she was being sexually abused by the individual that she was with. And I think that just by itself, because we were there for such a short time, and in reality made such a few number of contacts compared to the years that we spent here, for him to be able to identify, and he was the one who identified her as being a victim while the other trooper was doing Texas trooper things, just shows the large scale of that problem. To be able to come into contact with that in such a short time frame is pretty eye-opening, and they said it was very common down there. So it's a very large problem.
You may not know this, but Representative Webb is a former highway patrolman. Yeah. A little different today, yeah. Anything further? Any of you? Bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here today, and please express our gratitude to your families. You know, we know there's a sacrifice on their part as well. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Committee.
Director, welcome. We don't get to see you in Judiciary very often anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Darren Westby, Director of Wyoming Department of Transportation. And I'd like to say that the reason I'm not here is because I have a great team and we can divide and conquer, and I feel confident that we're being well represented, obviously. So thank you for the opportunity.
Colonel.
Mr. Chair, committee members, appreciate the opportunity for these gentlemen to come before you this morning to brief you on that Eagle Pass operation, or Operation Lone Star. We were selective in who we sent for a specific reason. I would, if Texas requested, send another group back. I think it's important work. And one of the things I've learned over the years, especially with border security, is every state is a border state in regard to this. And so anything that we can do to get better here in Wyoming, we are prone to do, or I want to be particularly forward leaning that way. And I appreciate very much the work that's being done in this session in regard to immigration and placing Wyoming in a position to be able to combat human trafficking, drug trafficking. So I appreciate that and would stand for any questions you may have.
Filer.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director and Colonel, first off, thank you guys. Thank you guys for being supportive of Wyoming. Thank you guys for being supportive of our border down in Texas. None of us can thank you all enough. But with that, with the testimony we heard from your troopers, we heard about, you know, the importance of a second trooper, somebody in that vehicle with them. We heard the importance of the interface systems where they can communicate better with other law enforcement agencies, bulletproofing vehicles, drone programs, handheld x-ray machines, all these different things. And you're right, Colonel, that every state is a border state right now. When I hear about more traffic coming up through our state and our very limited number of troopers to be able to handle what could possibly come later. And I like to be a lot more proactive than reactionary. What I would like, you know, if you guys could, I don't want you to spend a whole lot of time on it, maybe during the interim and stuff, to maybe find some ways and costs of what it would take for us to recruit those second troopers where they're needed, interfacing systems, the bulletproofing the vehicles, all those different things, because just not even 100 miles south of here, this is allowed. This stuff that, you know, they're allowed to just come in, and they're gonna keep moving their way through where they're on their way to Canada, and to believe it or not, there's probably just someone that just wanna go to work. But we need to give you guys the right tools, and these troopers, the right tools like they have down there, to make sure that, one, they're protected, and two, they're protecting us. And I would love to work with you guys during the interim, whatever it is, to maybe we could bring something to the budget session to make sure you guys have what you need there at YDOT and at the Highway Patrol.
Colonel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Filer, I appreciate that very much. Since I've joined the Wyoming Highway Patrol, which was January of 2023, excuse me, we've worked to not only ensure the absolute best training possible, but at the same time equipping our troopers to be able to respond to some of the challenges that they run in day to day. And I appreciate very much the director's support through exception requests to our budget. We're in the process now of rolling out some new equipment, night vision, new computer software. And one of the great values of this Texas trip, quite frankly, is I'm not taking a vendor's recommendation on a piece of equipment. I'm taking troopers, their opinions and their experiences of working with this. So to me, that's pretty significant. And I'm interested in a number of things that came from this Texas trip, which, the director may wince a little bit because there's always a price tag, but of what value? The value is human lives, or the lives of our trooper or peace officers. And I know we've been talking about the armor for the vehicles. Most of the time you can spec that from the manufacturer when you get the cars. So these are all things that are in works, but I'll be glad to talk to you in the interim. Thank you for that.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Representative, thanks for the question and the prompt for a good interim topic discussion. When I came on March of 23, just shortly after the colonel, you were sitting at 45, 50 vacancies?
A little bit more, 60 some.
Yeah, 60 some. And at the time, almost day one, these guys came to me and said, we need more troopers. And I put the challenge out to them. I said, there's no way in God's green earth I'm going to come in front of this body and ask for more FTEs when we can't fill what we have. So I put the challenge out, fill your FTEs, and I'll be happy to go battle to get more FTEs for the troopers. And we're down to 14, 15, 20, it depends on the day.
18 today.
18 today vacancies. So they've done a great job of not only finding recruits, but they hire and only hire the best of the best. They train and only graduate the best of the best. And so it's not easy to become a Wyoming highway patrolman, and nor should it be. And so it's a testament to what they've done to try to get the importance of their mission, the importance to the state of Wyoming, and they've been successful. And I'm very proud to be a part of it. And like I promised them, and I will be in front of you once they become successful, and they're getting very close. I will be coming back and asking for a full-time employee increase count in the trooper side. Now with that comes the financial side, and that's not my biggest concern, because like the colonel said, how do you put a price on human life? How do you put a price on what we're trying to accomplish with our mission? The balance and the priority is I have a big agency, almost $1 billion a year. Majority of that's supposed to go to the roads. Not to say that they're not on the roads, but law enforcement and road maintenance is a different beast to battle on the priority side of the house when it comes to a large agency. And so part of the interim conversation, I hope we can look into the mission of the Highway Patrol, the mission of law enforcement for the state of Wyoming, and how that all interacts. That you heard the troop behind us talk a lot about communication, and I appreciate the bills that are coming up and the bills that have been discussed. The interoperability is not quite where it should be, and I really want to thank the governor, Lynn Budd over at the Homeland Security, and all their efforts to get these guys down there to do that mission. We can do more, but there's just some things that we need to work through on a bigger statewide law enforcement effort. But thank you for the question and appreciate the opportunity.
Director, I'd just say that, this interoperability thing's been a bugaboo in public safety for way too long. And, I think that anything that we can do to improve that ability for agencies to share information, to enhance data, we still have agencies that are not using the NIBR system for their data reporting, and it is all those things that we all make better decisions when we have better data. And so I appreciate your support. When the chips are down, the public expects that we can handle whatever's out there. And I think most of us recognize that there are limitations, and we want to find ways to minimize those limitations so that we can coordinate effectively with fire service. We can coordinate effectively with small towns and big city police departments around the state, and do the very best that we can when the chips are down. So thank you all for what you're doing. Colonel, I continue to hear really good things about you personally from your personnel. I think you're doing the right stuff. And when you show up out there in the middle of a blizzard and, pay attention to what your troops are having to endure, speaks volumes. And thank you on behalf of myself and the committee for being here this morning.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I again appreciate the opportunity for these troopers to come and brief you on this. I'm particularly proud of the Guardians of the Cowboy State. They do incredible things every day. Namely, one, the common thread since I've been here is they save lives. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for your support.
And with that, House Judiciary will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.